Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Techstars Ask Me Anything session about exploring the circular economy, sustainable supply chains, and material innovation. My name is Cody Sims. I'm the Senior Vice President of Climate and Sustainability here at Techstars. We're excited to have two really knowledgeable experts with us here today to talk about circularity, the sustainable supply chains, and how innovation and startups fit into all of that. We've got Angie Martin, who's the Vice President at Heritage Environmental Services, and we have Dan Fitzgerald, who is the Product Sustainability Lead at Stanley Black & Decker. Maybe I'll have each of you just quickly introduce yourselves and your background, your focus areas, and in the meantime, those of you who are listening in, please feel free in the chat to just say hello, say where you're coming from, what your organization is. And in addition, if you have questions that you want, this is an Ask Me Anything session. So I'm going to start us off with a few questions. But if you have questions that you're burning to have answered, please enter them into the Ask a Question section of the web UI, and we'll start tackling those as we go here today. So Angie, maybe you say hi first.
Hi, my name is Angie Martin, and I have been associated with Heritage Environmental Services since the late 80s. I did take a few years off and work in some other industries and returned because that's what the recycle circle for Heritage is. I run our supply chain areas as well as participate in a lot of our regulatory affairs type things and emergency response. So been with the company for a long time. And I'm in Indianapolis, so many of you might know where Indianapolis is because there's some big basketball thing going to happen here in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Oops, I muted myself. Rock Chalk Jayhawk is what I have to say to that. That's my skin in the game there for you, Angie. Cool. Dan, you want to say hi?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dan Fitzgerald. I've been with Stanley Black & Decker for about 15 years. I'm based just north of Baltimore, Maryland, in a town called Towson. So I'm a Terp alum, a number 10 seed. So we got a long shot, but still be there rooting for them. And so our focus, within my role is to improve the sustainability of our products across the whole company. And really two big areas. One is utilizing sustainability as a point of inspiration for what our next product should be. And then the second area is, our existing portfolio. How do we continue to redesign those and deliver that functionality at lower environmental and negative social impact, right, with each design iteration? So those are really the two main areas we're going after when we're talking about improving our products for sustainability.
Well, super. Well, it's so excited to have you both here. You're, deep experts who've been working in this area for a long time. What our priority is amongst organizations like the ones that you two work for. So you know how things actually get done. You also have experience working with startups, so you know what it means for a startup to try to want to get something done with you, which is, where we at Techstars come into play, is that we obviously work with a lot of startups. So I think we have a mix here in the audience of startup founders, people who are investing in this space, as well as other large companies who are wanting to learn more about how to innovate in this space. So excited to get your feedback today. Again, this is an AMA, so if anyone in the audience who does have questions, feel free to drop them into the Ask a Question box. But I'll start with a few kickoff questions just to get us warmed up. So I'm curious, Dan and Angie and whoever wants to take this, and we can, let's make these kickoff questions kind of, move a little quickly so that we can just build our muscle here on answering questions. What internal steps have you taken in the last few years to make it easier to innovate sustainably? So whether that's processes, whether that's policies, tools, or even mandates that you've implemented, I guess as question one. And then question two is, what big things do you think are left to be done that would make the biggest difference in your success? It's a very big, broad question just to get us going.
So Angie, did you want to start, or would you like me to?
I'll be glad to.
Okay.
So at Heritage, we have honestly mandated investment in sustainable businesses. So we kind of have three prongs. We do investment in startups through Techstars and other things. We do investments in existing companies that are sustainable. Examples to that might be like a Climeco. We invested in, or we bought biosynthetic technologies, which makes marine safe oils. So we're buying existing technologies or companies with existing technologies, and then we're growing them at home at our research group, which we have some folks from the research group in the chat. We're looking at startups, and then we're also investing in proven technologies. So we have made it a mandate to go after these sustainable companies. So I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thanks. Yeah, and so one of the big things we did in 2018 was launch 2030 goals around corporate social responsibility. And so one of our big goals within product sustainability is to positively impact 500 million people through our innovative products, right? And the process that goes through essentially is that, we've defined essentially what we believe a product with purpose is as products that are addressing targets within the Sustainable Development Goals and are being sold in areas that actually have needs that the products are addressing, right? So we're looking at, we kind of use the UN as the blueprint of the needs of the world. And then there's another great tool called the Social Progress Indicator that kind of shows how countries are doing with respect to social needs. And so between the two, you can find the need and then ensure that it's being addressed where you're selling it, right? And so between those two, we kind of identify these products with purpose. And then we come up with methodologies for, how is it better? What is it contributing? And then, we can come up, with essentially each one sold approximately benefits X people, right? And so that's how we're keeping track of it. And so the business units are continually tasked to deliver more and more products with purpose on their roadmap. And then as they commercialize, right, and we get the details of the benefits, we're able to track it through people, which is something that on the other side of the sustainability report, when you're trying to read it, right, is a little more relatable, right? If you're just sort of generally trying to understand what's going on with a company rather than all the scientific terms of kilograms of equivalent CO2 emissions and all that, right? So
that's great. Yeah, so bringing a human lens to it, which obviously we're doing all of this to make humanity continue to actually be able to live and thrive on our planet. So makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, when you're trying to engage with a startup that has a new material innovation, you get an email, you get a pitch, you get a referral from a crazy venture investor like me or someone at Techstars, or a colleague even brings something in. What are the things you do? What is your first step in assessing viability, assuming there's already some kind of linkage with a problem you are trying to solve in the business today? How do you start to dive in to see whether or not this company sort of scientifically and from a business and markets perspective is something that you might want to consider working with?
Do you want to go first this time?
Sure. So, me personally, right, I would ask to see something physical, right? If they're a material company and they can say, they can do something, I'd say, do you have a physical prototype, right? That has been created and been through any testing, right? And sort of that's kind of the bar for me. Like, have you actually done it, or are we still at the step before where we think this chemistry could work, right? Because I think that's a little bit ahead of us, right? If you can't actually produce something yet, right? We can't trial it and see whether it works. So, but again, obviously, folks that are much more have in-depth knowledge of the material science, I would bring in as well to review, is what they're saying even possible from a scientific standpoint, and kind of all of that for the documentation review.
Our first step is always farmers' math. It has to work from a financial standpoint. And then we bring in, does it work from an environmental standpoint? We are stewards, we are a waste company at Heritage Environmental. I mean, the group is more than that, but is it going to work for the environment? Is it going to work technology wise? And is the farmer's math there? So if we have this great idea that's sustainable, but nobody wants to buy it or use it, or you can't implement it, or you have to put too much resources in it to push it over the top, then we're going to take a step back. And then also, we're always looking at things in the environmental space, construction materials, road construction materials space, and the chemical industry, just because that's the industries that we know and those combinations. So, but farmers' math, it's got to be a win-win for us.
That's great. I hadn't heard that phrase before, so I love it. And I guess related to that, how important is it that a company you're looking to pilot with needs to be able to execute at production scale volumes today versus sort of what that ramp might look like as you work with them, right? Like that's always a trade-off I think startups are having to make and that innovators are having to make when thinking about working with a new material or a new company is, you know, can this startup actually produce at the scale that's going to be required in the timeframes that are going to be required? And how do you balance that when looking at first your initial pilot versus potentially, you know, thinking about future scale up?
I'll take that one first. So we have this great research lab, and so that is a good place. We get a sample and we get it in the lab quickly. But because we have the environmental side, the chemical side, and the construction material side, sometimes we either can ramp it up with our own equipment to do trials, or through Techstars programs, the mentor sometimes can hook them up with people who can temporarily help on the ramp up. So I would say lab, and then use our industry contacts to move forward.
Yeah. Just on this question too, I think scale is one piece because I mean, if it's unique enough, you can slowly introduce it, right? But one of the other topics I'd like to touch on here that it might be good for a startup to understand that corporates are thinking about too is if you come in with something extremely unique, a lot of corporations are looking for risk mitigation in the sense of dual suppliers and different things to kind of back up in case any hiccups occur in the supply chain. So really, with a new material, if somehow it's also backwards compatible in the sense, and I'm using an injection mold example, but if it can be injection molded, right, then you use your material, or you could take a step back and use a traditional petroleum based in the same mold. Well, then that helps to mitigate a little bit of risk of onboarding something that's very limited in supply and maybe only one person can deliver for now. So I think those kind of thought processes as you're pitching your new material, right, and showing that there's backup plans as well, right, is a pretty powerful thing.
That's great. And actually on that notion of sort of pitching new materials, like how does serendipity fit into your process? Maybe talk a little bit about sort of how you may or may not have sort of a sustainable roadmap of like, here are the materials in our supply chain we ultimately want to swap out, versus how sort of serendipity also plays a part in, again, a new pitch coming inbound to you that maybe was something you hadn't considered, and sort of what that looks like in terms of how each of you operate.
I'm happy to go first if you don't mind. I can give a serendipitous example of something, right, that I know occurs is that there's general interest in a material, but it just so happens, we may not be developing that product at this time that would use that material. So then to ask internally, hey, can we put a whole test plan to run something that's not assigned to a product launch? You get into, well, you're battling with product launch space that wants to use a lab, or, we don't have enough resources to do stuff that isn't actually in product development. So sometimes serendipitously, something goes through our process much quicker just because of timing, in the sense that, hey, the material showed up and we just happen to have a product running through and we were able to test it right then. And that's that, right? So there is a bit of luck in it all, unfortunately, but that's, I think, just the way the world works, right? So.
Create your own luck, don't you? So some of our biggest successes in the sustainability realm over the years have been, I would call them pulls and not pushes. That's when customers have problems and they're asking us for a solution and they're pulling us into it. So luckily we have Salesforce on all three of those different areas I talked about, on the environmental waste side, on the construction material side, and in the chemical side. And those folks bring questions to us. But we also just updated our Heritage Innovation Team layout, and that is to ask for questions from our own employees. And when they have ideas on something that they see that's sustainable, that we can either adjust a product in our own supply chain or find something new to provide. So we're always looking for these great questions and answers. And we have so many ideas that we have to have a stage gate system to kind of create that luck, right? So we have, we put together a process where we put all the ideas in this bin, and then you have to make it through the farmer's math to get to the next bin, and then the next bin. And I think that helps things turn into reality. So
that's great. There's a blog post I'm going to share here in the chat by a VC named Paige Craig. This is just for the audience's sort of info. I've always found it to be a really great blog post, and it's about how investors find great startups, but it aligns with what you just said, Angie, which is, there are four means. There's hunting, trading, trapping, and farming. And it's sort of, and back to your farmer's math, but it's him laying out, his strategies for each of those, which is how do you proactively source? How do you plant seeds of things you might be interested in? How do you deal with things that are coming inbound to you, et cetera? But it's a really cool, sort of very simple framework that I think makes sense. It's from a venture perspective, but I also think it makes sense from an innovation perspective too, around the kinds of things you might be looking for inside your organization. So fun reading for folks on the side to dive into.
Yeah, I would also add there too, just before we jump off that too, I get a lot of great information from, you got to find, it takes a while, but you got to find good listservs essentially, right? Like smart briefs from sustainability or, Techstars, innovation newsletters, right? You gotta take some time, to read through and keep up to date in your space, right? So I feel like actively having, everyone hates email, but actively having put in your inbox in front of your face, right, helps you to read through it, and stay on top of some stuff you may not have found otherwise by Googling. So. Yep.
All right, one last question from me, and then we'll dive into, we've got a bunch of audience questions that are brewing, which is great. Talk to me about the process internally for a startup to go, particularly a material startup, just because I think it's much more pilot intensive, but any startup that you want to go from proof of concept to pilot to contract. Like, what is the flow of a company as it moves and matures through a process to being a full-fledged, like, wow, we're now deploying this and rolling this out, to our customer base?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can roughly give it for plastics, I guess, is my best example of what the process would look like. But, because that's one of the major areas we're looking at in terms of more sustainable materials in our products. So the first step would be sort of the documentation review. So, what is your material? What is it most like in terms of quote unquote traditional materials we're used to using? Matching up the tech sheets, right? Making sure that on paper it looks like it would work. Then the next step, which can potentially be difficult for startups, is color match. If the plastic requires color, because in our finished goods space, right, brand coloring is critical, right? And so you can run into issues if it's mechanical recycling with color match, right, and all sorts of stuff. But color also affects the properties of the material, right? And at the end of the day, that plastic has to function for its, impact resistance, its flammability resistance, its insulation resistance, whatever it's doing for us, right? So once you get the color match, right, then we can start to mold it in a mold, a trial mold, and then run the sort of product level testing we have on our product against it. So, but again, sometimes that color match step, right, for a startup is a pretty difficult task. But that's kind of it, is sort of paper, get the material to a form that is exactly what we would use, and then mold it and test it, right?
Cool. So I'm going to take this from the opposite end, because we are at our heart a waste company. So we start sometimes from the back and work our way backwards. So kind of as an example, we had a waste stream that we were approached with that had a huge amount of copper in it. And so we started in the lab looking at this waste stream, and we decided in the lab that we could make a compound that could be a food additive for farm animals. Me and my farmer's math, I'm in Indiana, sorry. So boiler up though, that's my basketball thing for the week. So we proof of concept, we do the farmer's math, we figure out that it works bench scale, we figure out that it works pilot scale. Then you have to start doing the analysis, because this is a hazardous chemical. So it falls under a whole lot of regulations. And that's the part where I want to kind of be different than what Dan was saying. So now we have to go to the government and get approval and make sure that everybody's agreeing that that there are no toxic chemicals that are going to go through this process and things like that. So so where color matches your thing, our thing is like government going along with the story. So we can have the best story ever and the best product, but if we can't get the agencies to approve it, then we're going to stop because we can't take the big risk to spend the money.
I agree. There's a little bit of aspect in the plastics too. There's a, again, if it's doing flammability, right, you need a UL approval on the plastics. So.
Right.
But yeah, but those things, again, like for startups are, harder and maybe expensive barriers, right, to getting in. But unfortunately, that's just the nature of what we have to deal with. So.
Yeah, it's like, if you want to build a company in the health space, like you've got to get through FDA, right? It's the same sort of things. Absolutely. Or if you're distributing a plastic product in Europe, you got to get your CE mark done, right? So I'm curious on that note, one of the questions that has come in through the AMA is around regulation. And in particular, Europe, which has a more heavily regulated environment right now as it pertains to sustainability, and thus has maybe seen more progress in terms of sustainable goods deployment and also on the carbon and emission side, how that relates to the US, which over at least the last, 5-6 years has maybe been less regulated in this regard. How does regulation play in? And I think, you can each talk about the global scope or not of each of your companies and how you navigate that. But curious how you have to think about regulation as you're looking at, a given product, and if you think regulation creates incentives that drive greater sustainability, or any other perspectives you may have there.
I feel like our strategy of being in a leadership position is obviously stay ahead of regulation, right? You can just imagine it as sort of a moving bar behind you, like in a video game that's going to push you forward. And the farther you stay ahead of it, the better, right? Because if you get caught up to where it catches you, then it's a fire drill, and you spend a lot of time and energy trying to react quickly to a sudden change, being reactive. So in terms of whether regulation is good or bad, it kind of, it depends on how it's implemented, unfortunately. But I do feel like if we're going to continue to live in a world defined by capitalism, then you need some external body to put the social price on things, right? To make your decisions fit into a financial world. So I feel like that would probably be the government's obligation to do that. And so we're seeing that obviously in Europe, and I think we're going to start seeing that more in the US as well.
So I agree that in order to tip the scales to the environment, we're going to need additional regulations. But our approach is full on the offensive, to watch those laws as they're being written, make sure that they're not going to have unintended consequences, to allow the good to happen. Does that make sense? Like sometimes there are these unintended consequences that get written into laws or into the regulations. And so I would say, to me, we're going to have these rules, but they need to be thoughtful. We all of us as a society need to participate in the rulemaking process to make sure that we don't somehow push out something that could be good, and make sure that we allow things that can be allowed. And then we want the win-win, right? We want to make sure that things that we're doing are good for the environment, they're good for resource management wise, and they make sense. That's how you're sustainable.
Right. And like you said, the good regulations that drive decent behavior, so I'll just anecdotally say, before in Europe, end of life waste used to just be how many did you sell, what's its weight, right? So if it's just purely on weight, that's not going to provide any feedback to your design engineers to change anything, right? But now some countries are getting advanced over there and defining different types of packaging, right? And so worse packaging costs more, right? So now when you pull that to the front end and you compare, well, the cost to source is this, the cost at end of life is this, now you start to get different math, right? And again, it's that kind, but you got to get it a little more specific. And the problem is when regulation gets specific like that, then business likes to push back and say, well, it's too complicated. So it's like you have these battles, but really, if you want to drive true change and change that makes sense, right, you kind of have to get to that level, right? And make sure you are incentivizing or decentivizing appropriate behavior, right, on the front end. So.
Yeah, that's great. we've got two questions coming in here through the AMA, both about sort of end of life and recycling. One about particularly, and this may be, I don't know, Dan, more applicable to you since you actually manage products that need to be end of life, whereas at Heritage, Angie, you're dealing with the leftover residuals of things that have been end of life and how those turn into new things. But both of you feel free to jump in on these. How do you think about, one question is particularly about how do you think about right to repair, and does that factor into product design? And then secondly is, what needs to happen for manufacturing to produce more materials that are easy to disassemble and recycle? And maybe, Angie, that's where you could weigh in too, as well as to produce materials whose waste streams can be circularized as well. I think would be the sort of the analog for you there.
Go ahead.
Okay. So on right to repair, that is it's a very sticky issue because people come at it from a lot of different ways. But I think generally,
and maybe define it for folks who in the audience don't know what that means. Okay,
so right to repair is it's a combination of an environmental push more in Europe, and in the U.S. it's more of a consumer rights push, right? And so in the U.S. it really originates from larger farm equipment getting more advanced and more electronic, kind of like our cars have become, and pushback from that industry that I can't, repair my own tractor or this or that. They feel like they're being forced through expensive repair channels, right? Because the products are becoming so proprietary that only the manufacturer can repair them, right? So consumers are pushing back, saying they're basically trying to monopolize, the whole life cycle, right? And so, for us and our products specifically, I feel like we're not, they're still repairable in a sense, and we're not really, we're supportive, I think, in general, of keeping the product and service for as long as possible. I think the problem runs into a little bit on the really lower end inexpensive things is essentially the cost to ship the replacement part sometimes outweighs, by just buying something new. And unfortunately, right, we're gonna have to overcome some of that, and hopefully innovation and technology, because that's the same issue, I'm sure you see on the waste side, right, is the whole recycling equation has to take into account the return logistics. And so that's always something you have to overcome. So these concepts of decentralized 3D printing of replacement parts and all that stuff sounds great, right? That's an area where, you can overcome those barriers to saying, because and it's going to be on the consumer's decision, right? Do I pay half, 75%, or even more than an original product to repair my current, or do I just start fresh and get a new one, right? And when you're playing with those kind of economics, again, which is why, some government intervention around making the economics look better for what we know is right, because left to just economics alone, you're going to get decisions that I don't blame people for making, right?
So I want to talk about batteries and end of life, if that's okay to kind of turn the conversation.
Yeah, let's do
it. So first of all, we all know that renewable energy comes in fits and spurts, right? The sun shines when the sun shines, the wind blows when the wind blows, the water flows when the water flows. Those are all great. So all of that points to the fact that we're going to have to do more and more energy storage in order to have more renewable energy. The only way I know how to store energy is in some kind of a battery. So with that, right now, the best technology is this lithium ion chemistry that we're playing with. And those batteries are going to have a lifespan. So it's important, I think, as we're designing those batteries to do the whole life cycle analysis, to think about the entire carbon footprint. Can we repair the batteries? How long are they going to last? And then when they have a reduced amount of use left, is it better to find a secondary use for those batteries? Or is it better to break them up and get some of the valuable chemicals out of them? Or is our approach really a hybrid approach depending upon each individual battery and things like that? And I think if we think about the end of life as we're designing these batteries and moving forward, we're going to have a better chance of being successful in this whole end of life management piece.
All right, and as a quick follow-up, Angie, I don't know if you're aware, but over in Europe, they're updating the battery directive, and there's a program out there that came out of the World Economic Forum called the Global Battery Alliance that is looking at developing a passport like that, where kind of this information about the battery's origin and all of that is kind of stored in a database. And essentially some of that will be transported on to end of life management when you receive it. So you can look at it and be like, okay, it's got this many cells in it. It's this chemistry, right? And essentially get that information over so you're not guessing, right, as you receive a pile of batteries.
Great. We have a question here that is, it's around measurement. So beyond aligning with the UN SDGs, and maybe you can comment specifically on, what work you do try to do to align with the UN SDGs, if that's a measurement system you use. What are the concrete metrics you're trying to hit right now in terms of sustainability? And how does, and then there's a follow-up comment on that about how do you measure or monitor the impact of your material consumption in terms of CO2 transport, recyclability, as well as part of that sustainability measurement?
Sure. So let me try to make sure I cover all of that. So
yeah, or do it one at a time. Let's maybe just start with, are you measuring against the SDGs, and if so or if not, what else are you currently specifically measuring against in terms of sustainability?
Yeah, so I don't. So if that question about SDGs is literally the indicators that are on the end of the targets, right? We don't have those up, and because again, sometimes it's hard to tell a company's individual contribution to those indicators anyway in the first place. So we're not doing that, but we are aligning to the targets, the sub targets underneath the goals, not just saying, oh, the goal says a city. This helps the city, that counts, right? We do try to say, no, it's actually helping security of, an open space, which is a specific goal under there, right? But in terms of like our whole sustainability program as people, products, and planet. So in the people area, we're mainly focused on upskilling. So technology is changing quickly. People are being left behind. How do we upskill our own folks and employees in the community and people in the communities we work? So that's really the big push in people. And products, I've kind of laid it out. It's the 500 million. In our own portfolio, we've got the Ellen MacArthur commitment, which is 100% reusable, recyclable, compostable packaging by 2025. And then sustainable supply chain, we're shooting for 2/3 of our supply chain by spend setting scope 1 and scope 2 science-based targets by 2025. So that's take care of your own house, because we know scope 3 is incredibly difficult. And then by 2030, we're internally calculating our scope 3 emissions and trying to get an absolute reduction of 35% from a 2017 baseline. So kind of the first part of the sustainable supply chain goal is very actionable. We're just asking, hey, measure your scope 1 and 2, set a science-based target, which is essentially a fixed percentage if you want to go linearly, right? And that's that, right? It gets action going. But then that's hopefully great. That action translates into actual measurement by 2030 on a 35% reduction, right? As well as engaging with startups and innovative people that can deliver functional materials at lower impact than we're currently seeing on our materials we're using, right?
And I'm hearing too that, with the people side, you're all taking a sort of a much, I would call it broader halo view of sustainability at Stanley, Dan, which is that it's sort of it's the inclusiveness of sustainability in addition to the environmental side of sustainability. So looking at the sort of the S side of ESG in addition to the environmental side when you think about sustainability broadly, sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, I say we're the 3 Ps, but we just substitute profit for product, right? Because product is essentially where you make the profit. So,
right.
But yeah, it's people, planet, and product. And so the planet is more of our own operations, zero waste landfill, context-based water targets, and carbon neutral by 2030 for our own operations.
Great.
So we actually go with 4 Ps.
Fantastic.
People, planet, profit, and then we added patrons. And here's why. Most of our business is a service business. We're not making widgets, we're taking stuff back. So in order to get that whole reverse logistics thing straight, we went with patrons to remember that we're providing a service to our customers. So that's enough on the piece. On the S part, I did want to say one of the very first things that we did when we brought on a sustainability leader, we had her initially work. Her very first thing that she did was to work on the sustainability of our employees, meaning we need to attract good employees. We need to retain good employees. We looked at the cost of turning over employees. And we certainly want to be inclusive when we're attracting these employees, but we want to keep them. So we did a lot of work initially on just making sure that we could explain to people our culture, right? We're problem solvers. We are, we encourage freedom to learn and grow. We have this value system. We want to make sure that our employees understand it. And to us, that is core to sustainability as a company. And then from there, we looked at environmental sustainability, which we've always done. That's what our business is. We've looked at the governance piece. So on the environmental sustainability, we want to make sure that our goals are aligned so they don't prevent us to grow. So we want to look at reducing the carbon footprint per employee or per $1 million revenue or whatever that is. We want to make sure that all of our goals on that front are very much aligned with allowing us to grow, and that they're metered that way. And then one of the things that we do is we help our customers find recycling outlets, especially through our total waste management out. So we want to maximize those numbers. We want to increase our plastics recycled, our cardboard recycled. And then one of the last things that we do so we count our metrics. It's a little different because of what we do. One of the things we do is we take in hazardous wastewaters and we treat those, and then we're able to discharge them to the publicly owned treatment works, who then treats them further, and they go back, because we all know that all the water we have now is all the water we're ever going to have, and we have to keep it as clean as possible. So we're looking at the tons of water that we've cleaned up and discharged. So anyway, we're very active in kind of how we're counting things. We just took a big step up this year on our sustainability report. We do have goals in all 4 categories: people, planet, profit, and patrons. So we don't look the same, but we're there.
No, that's awesome. Well, fantastic. It's great to hear, both of you sort of bringing the human element into the sustainability side, because I think as much as, sustainability often gets talked about on the environmental front and all the work that we need to do, whether it's around climate or around circularity, which is incredibly important. It's, the reason we're doing that is for the humans who live on the planet and for the other life on the planet to continue to be resilient and live here. So, factoring humans into your story, I think is incredibly important. One of the final questions we have currently, though, again, people feel free to submit more questions to the AMA, is around leadership. And what was the process for getting leadership buy-in to the work you're doing? And I guess first question I would ask there is, was it a top-down thing where leadership already knew they wanted to do this and has been working with you to roll it out? Or have you seen things kind of take on more of a grassroots form where there was a group of motivated employees who pushed the initiative to leadership and it became a priority? I've seen both things happen in different companies. I'm curious, in your direct experiences, how that worked in terms of letting it become a priority, such that, we have 2 very seasoned and experienced people here today talking with us about all this, representing your companies.
So I'll go first this time. Both. How's that? So I want to start from the top down. I remember in college, this would have been in the 80s. I'm really old. The then president of our company came to Purdue to speak to the environmental engineering group. And he talked about how in the future we were going to mine the metals out of our landfill and recycle them. So this is in the late 80s. Now, we decided through a lot of chemistry and entropy and all that stuff that it's better to get the metals before we put them in the landfill because of all the chemistry you do to keep them in the landfill. But we're doing that now. We are reclaiming multiple different, we have a project to keep zinc out of landfills. We've got a project to keep copper out of landfills. That's what we do. So I would say that's there. We have doubled down on investments from the top. We've been told that we are going to invest in sustainable companies. So that comes from the ownership, the family ownership down. But we also have some very active employees. We have a Green Eyed Peas, which goes with the 4 Ps program, where those employees are we're having pollination gardens, and we're doing all those things at the grassroots. So I think we meet in the middle. And I think we attract, because our leadership is interested, we're attracting folks to work for us that want to be part of that sustainable output, and we all work together to move forward.
No, thanks. Yeah. So on our side, I feel like what really kicked it into high gear was when our current CEO took over and made a proclamation, essentially, that, our company has 3 strategic imperatives. The first is top quartile financial performance. The second is world-class innovation. And the third is upping our commitment to corporate social responsibility. So with those 3 goals sort of from the top driving down, right, it allowed us to create a corporate social responsibility strategy and then deploy it down, right? And another thing I'll say for our company, I feel like it's a very unique space where no one's really afraid to email or talk to anyone, right? You don't have to kind of run it up, and do all that, right? You just, everyone just kind of works there are organization charts, but everyone doesn't really work in that way, which I think makes it a really neat space to drive change a bit quicker. So, but yeah, I would say it's really top down that got us going, right? Because when that's in the shareholders letter, you can always be like, as you're describing this, you can always start off saying like, here's where this is coming from. Okay, here we go, right? Just so.
Well, I think that's good. It's good. Both of your use cases are good for everyone listening. If you work at a large company, you can take initiative, build grassroots momentum, get other people in the company excited. If you don't have that top-down support today and build momentum, you can do things as simple as like if you have Slack or Microsoft Teams or something, starting a channel where you're sharing articles and just helping people inside the company learn, hosting brown bag lunches, things like that to build more employee momentum. If you're an executive leader in a company or you're the CEO of your own startup, like it starts with you, right? So to the extent you realize the importance of this, no one else is going to make it happen in your company. Like it's up to you to push. Not that no one else is going to make it happen. Employees can help make it happen, but it does require top-down support to truly drive it into the organization. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, and Cody, you bring up a good point. Again, this is not like a product promotion or anything, but I've found we use something called Workplace by Facebook, which is essentially your Facebook at work. But like you said, that's a good way to find people, that are just genuinely interested in it, and they're your biggest allies, right? Once you find somebody that really wants to get going on this, right, you give them a little bit of support, and they're gonna duplicate your efforts. And so right. Slack or other tools that can allow you to kind of post stories of interest and find those folks, I think are pretty powerful too to drive the change.
I mean, we've had that at Techstars, like our sustainability Slack channel, which started maybe a year ago. Now has upwards of almost half the company in it. So right. There's just, there's been a lot of internal interest in the topic, which has all been sort of grassroots driven initially. Two more questions from me, and then, we may wrap up here. I'm curious, particularly how you exert influence in your supply chain. So Dan, how do you exert influence on your suppliers? Angie, how do you exert influence on the waste streams you may be acquiring or the manufacturers you may be working for to purchase waste streams when it comes to experimenting with new or more sustainable materials that you want to build around?
So I'll go ahead and jump in. I actually want to answer the supply chain question too, because we do have a supply chain. So we started last year with a very earnest effort with starting supply chain code of conduct. That was our first step. We're going to respect our people. We're going to act ethically. We're going to do so. So that was it was quite a hurdle getting out to our existing suppliers. We have thousands of them. You've got to sign this supply chain code of conduct or we aren't moving forward with you. So that was important to us. Sometimes paper doesn't do anything, but at least we've communicated the expectation that our suppliers are behaving in a legal fashion, in a business moral, ethical fashion, and doing things correctly. So that was really important to us. The other thing on a supply chain front is, I have to say this, we were trying so hard to limit our suppliers, and I think Dan talked about this very early. We were trying to get down to single source suppliers and maximize our spend and find the best suppliers. And over the last 12 months, I don't have to explain to you guys what's happened, but that we've learned that our critical suppliers, we have to have multiple suppliers. So then you're having to pick, are we going to go with the most sustainable or the financial, or do we just have to, the things we have to have multiple suppliers. So we've learned a few lessons on that. We were really working hard on that. And as we are getting our hands around our suppliers, we have two kinds of suppliers. One, things we buy papers and pencils, and then people that we buy recycling services from and things. So those, we have a very structured process where we audit them. We're looking at their compliance with regulations, which also, I like to say we like to keep all our hazardous chemicals in containers and away from the environment. We're looking at all of that. So we're very careful on that supply chain front. and people would say maybe sometimes too careful. The other thing that we're always looking at is Superfund circular risk, which is the long-term bad things that happen when you don't get something recycled properly, I would say. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the supply chain question is a tough one, because this, to me, to build a sustainable supply chain and ask suppliers to improve their operations or to collaborate on an innovative concept, or requires building trust, right? And building trust and relationship takes time. And then if you need to double all of your suppliers for risk mitigation, right? So the thinking is, it could be a lot of work, but it's, to me, incredibly important thing to be done. And really, so how our strategy has been going the past 2 or 3 years, we've been working through the Carbon Disclosure Project supply chain program. And so the past couple of years, we've been focused on sort of awareness. Please fill it out, right? No matter how much just get involved. And now we're starting to move it to, okay, we've had a couple years of awareness. Here's what we're shooting for, right? It's very explicitly called out, right? Setting science-based targets for Scope 1 and Scope 2. We got a 2025 goal to get 2/3 of our spend there. If you're significant spend and you're not doing it, I would be concerned potentially, right? Over the next 5 years, right? Now, we're not coming out and directly saying that, but I feel like the writing's on the wall. And that's how it's gonna go, right? And so I feel like, you start slow. Here's what we're doing. Here's the plan. Here's time to react. But then after a certain point, if you've given enough time, you have to make decisions. And so I feel like that's the path we're down, if that's detailed enough.
That's great. Yeah. And one last sort of question when it comes to supply chain, which is on the logistics side. So it's one of the audience questions, which is, transportation logistics are challenging, and particularly if you're trying to stay true to whether it's an emissions target or other degree of sustainable targets. If you're having to ship goods halfway around the world to kind of close the circular loop, sometimes you may lose some of those benefits. So curious to hear either of you talk about the importance of location, the importance of sort of transportation logistics. Angie, you've talked a lot about reverse logistics, which you may want to define for people if they're not familiar with that term. Which clearly is making its way in the manufacturing world. We even have consumer-facing portfolio companies that are using reverse logistics today to allow furniture to be rented, fixed up, and then re-rented back out to other consumers. The whole rent the runway model for other types of things. But let's talk for a minute about logistics and transportation, and then I think we'll probably wrap up for the day here after that.
So reverse logistics is a hot topic right now in pharma that needs to be taken back out. It's a hot topic. It's always been an issue with waste. So think about, if I make paint, I have a truck of paint and I take my truck of paint to 5 retailers and I offload my paint and I'm done. Reverse logistics, when you're looking at waste, maybe this customer has a drum of acid and this customer has a drum of cyanide and this customer has 5 drums of caustic, and this customer has drums of lab pack materials. We have to find a way that we can send our trucks on a route efficiently to pick up those little tiny amounts at different places. By the way, probably can't put the cyanide and the acid on the same truck. And then they have to end up at the proper permitted hazardous waste facility that can handle it. And for example, there are only 9 commercial hazardous waste incinerators in the entire country. And more than half of them are, well, all but 2 are on the east half of the country. So you are moving this material by definition really far. So now the small amounts, they move. We have transfer facilities where you bulk up things that are not bulking, but you gather things that are going to a location. So we spend a lot of time on reverse logistics, and it's not as efficient as like delivering gasoline in a 6,000 gallon tanker every day to the same place. It just isn't as efficient, but we have to be sustainable and treat these hazardous chemicals appropriately while we're hoping customers are making the smallest amount of this as possible, right? That's part of sustainability's waste minimization. However, when we do have large waste streams and waste streams that move in the same areas over and over again, we have found that rail is a great way to be more efficient and have a little smaller carbon footprint. I think it's about 4 times less for rail than it is for over-the-road trucks. So when it fits and it works, we really like to move bulk materials via rail if they're not too high haz. You don't want to put a lot of high haz stuff on a rail and then not have it attended. There's something about having a truck there. So we do our best, and we do spend a lot of time trying to maximize the containers per loaded mile and all that stuff to reduce cost and to reduce our carbon footprint of our trucks. In the meantime, we are working towards electrifying some of our truck fleet, which was another way for us to reduce our carbon footprint. Don't have enough time to get into all that, but we are definitely moving in that direction.
Yeah, just I'll touch on some things we're doing. I think from a supply chain engagement, though, I mean, we're generally partnered with such large transportation companies to handle things. I feel like they've gotten the message and they know they're a big impact and they're working on it. So you don't really have to put the pressure on them per se. But in the meantime, while the transportation industry is evolving, the things we can do obviously are optimize product packaging so that you optimize the pallet, right? So that you're getting full loads, whether that be in cargo ships or the containers that go on the ships and the trucks, right? Make where we sell. We're really trying to do that. We have 3 major areas: Asia, North America, Europe. We have 3 major plants, right? For at least the power tools business. Trying our best to make products where we sell them, and minimizing air, obviously, because that's, ridiculously emissive way, it goes ship, rail, truck, and then way far out air. So, those are the things we're doing, right, to address it. But I do believe that, at least in this space, right, because so many people need transportation and it's so consolidated, right, that they've already gotten the message, right? You don't really have to bang on their door. You just have to do your best to optimize, and every year, hopefully, your emissions are getting better because they're improving their equipment.
Great. Well, one last quick hitter question, which is, if you had a magic wand that you could use to make your life easier in terms of driving sustainability through your organization or through the industry, please, what would you wave it and have it do?
So I have a funny story on that first. I have a 25-year-old daughter, but when she was 4, she asked for a magic wand for Christmas, and she literally wanted one that worked. Like, she thought she should get a magic wand that she wanted one that worked. But
love it.
We honestly, let's go to the startups here. I want to talk about the startups that we work with. We would love it if the startups could understand how to work with an established corporation, and how the folks that work at our established corporation could figure out how to work with startups. And let me explain that. With startups, sometimes you have 1 or 2 people. They can move very quickly. Things are very fluid. They need answers right away. That is important. However, there are decisions in a bigger corporation, if we're trying to help a startup, that have to be made in a sequence fashion. Only certain people can make decisions. So it's always a push and a pull with these startups. We want them to understand that they want changes made right away, and we sometimes take a few minutes to get the answers. And so we need to find a happy medium there. And then the second piece is, we need to work with, if we could make the government understand what we're trying to do from a sustainability process when they're making these rules. And I think I touched on that earlier.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Angie. Dan, what's your genie gonna do when it jumps out of the bottle here? I changed the format for you.
Well, I guess from a circular design, a circular economy perspective, my magic wand wave would be that any material we put out can be recycled somehow, right? Collected and recycled. Because then, right, we everything we wouldn't have to change up materials, right? We would just, have a way to collect and just do higher recycled content on the front end. But because that doesn't exist, our hope is that at least our strategy of, first and foremost, putting things out there that have a shot at a second life. So that's like making sure your things are recyclable. And then on the flip side, on your sourcing, trying to specify things with higher levels of recycled content. So you're helping as much as you can with the circle. You're putting stuff out there that can be recycled. You're demanding recycled content with the hopes that the infrastructure will rise up around that if enough people do it. And I think, that's the whole point of the Ellen MacArthur commitment on the packaging, right? Is commit to making it recyclable, then commit to a PCR level, and then that'll build recycling, right? So I think that's a good strategy, right? And when the circle is big, and your influence is only maybe the top semicircle, right, of the process, and then the customer has to take it to somewhere properly, that has to get it to the proper, all that stuff occurs out of your chain. The best you can do is make it so it can get into that chain and be processed, and try to order some more of it if you can, right, to help close it.
Super great. Well, thank you both so much for your time. I really enjoyed the discussion. Hopefully people listening in did as well. I want to make a couple of quick announcements. The first is we are announcing today something called the Techstars Sustainability Summit, which we're hosting on April 15th. What looks like two of us posted the link at the same time, which is great. Jump in and register. It's open to the web, open to anyone. So register, share it with friends that care about this topic. Share it with your coworkers and employees. It's going to be a multi-hour conference, virtual conference, diving deep into topics related to sustainability and climate. We're going to have startups there showcasing technology. We're going to announce the winners of the Techstars Sustainability Challenge, which is a project that both Heritage and Stanley Black & Decker have worked with us at Techstars to select companies around. We are going to have a couple of really high-profile keynotes. Our new Techstars CEO, Maël Gavet, is going to speak. So if you want to hear from our new CEO at Techstars, we have Nicole Sistrom, who is on the boards of Activate and Prime Coalition, which are two very major influential organizations in climate change innovation. And we have Ron Gonen from Closed Loop Partners, the CEO of that investment firm, joining us as well. So it's going to be a really well-rounded event, lots of great content information, good networking connections to have, and we really hope to see you there. In addition to that, just wanted to thank you for all that you're doing. It takes all of us to help make the planet more sustainable, help make our products more sustainable, push your influence into your organizations. Hopefully you got some good takeaways today from Angie and Dan in terms of what they've been able to do inside theirs. And we look forward to seeing you at our next one of these upcoming AMAs. Thank you so much, Dan and Angie. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.